Welcome to the Digital Identity Digest, the audio companion to the blog at Spherical Cow Consulting. I'm Heather Flanagan, and every week I break down interesting topics in the field of digital identity, from credentials and standards to browser weirdness and policy twists. If you work with digital identity but don't have time to follow every specification or hype cycle, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. Hello again and welcome back. Today we're talking about delegation again. But this time, we're getting technical. What today's systems offer, why they don't cut it, and where the real gaps are. Now, before we dive too deep, if you already know OAuth inside and out, just hang on for about 30 seconds, and if you don't, no problem, here's the quick version. OAuth is a protocol that lets you authorize one service to access something you control without handing over your password. It's why you can click Sign in with Google or let a calendar app sync your meetings without giving it full control of your account. OAuth matters a lot because it's the plumbing behind how access is delegated online today. And if it works well, you get secure, limited delegation. If it's based in pieces, and spoiler, it is, you end up with messy workarounds and security gaps. All right, so now let's get into it. Once upon a time, digital systems were built around a beautifully simple idea. There was one user, one identity, one device, one intent. And that model worked for some value of worked. Mostly it was good enough to solve like 80% of the use cases. And as always, the remaining 20%, which is where delegation lives, takes the majority of effort to get right. Fast forward to today, and you come to realize that real life is a very messy actor and full of overlapping authority in multi-actor systems. It's not one-to-one-to-one. Instead, what you have are caregivers managing medical appointments for family members, or executive assistants filing expenses on behalf of the CEO, or an AI agent moving money between your accounts, ideally without buying themselves a Tesla along the way. Delegation isn't a nice-to-have feature, and it never really was. Just ask anyone who's had to clean up a family member's accounts after they passed away. But now, with agentic AI entering the picture, delegation has gone from this edge case that we kind of try to avoid to a foundational design problem. And most of our systems are nowhere near ready to handle that. Which takes us to OAuth. If you worked anywhere near identity, you've heard of OAuth 2.0. If you're asking which spec specifically, well, there's a lot of specifications that define different features of OAuth. So it's a lot and it's crazy pants. But ultimately, OAuth is the backbone for letting one service act on behalf of a user. Things like sign in with Google, let this app access your calendar. And that kind of basic authorization, OAuth is absolutely brilliant. You grant an app permission to access a slice of your data, and the app can work with it without needing your new username and password. It's really nice, simple, it's mostly secure. But for complex human-centered delegation, especially when you start thinking about agents acting independently, OAuth starts to look a little bit shaky, because here's what usually happens. Alice authorizes a service, the service acts, and in the logs it looks like Alice herself did everything. There's no clear distinction between I, Alice, took this action, and a service I authorized did this for me. And that's fine if the stakes aren't particularly low, like syncing a calendar. But what happens when it's an AI agent paying your bills, or booking your travel, or managing your healthcare claims? Now the stakes are a little higher. If you don't want your AI agent, or your spouse, or your child to have unlimited, untraceable power, move that $10,000 wherever you like and hope for the best. You also don't want it to be blocked at every turn because the system can't understand that it's acting with limited delegated authority. Neither of these are good things. Without what's called, rich, constrained delegation, you either grant too much access and lose control, or block useful actions completely, neither of which is a great feature. And OAuth, as widely implemented today, simply wasn't designed for that kind of fine-grained, auditable, multi-actor delegation. Now, to be fair, OAuth is absolutely not standing still. That protocol isn't done. There's constant work going on to evolve it and grow it and adapt it to what's needed today. There is a particular specification called RFC 8693 on token exchange, and that defines how to swap one token for another, basically allow services to act on behalf of the user while keeping an audit trail. And it's real progress. It opens the door for authorized intermediaries, audit trails reflecting delegation, clear chains of authority. But, and this is a big but, RFC 8693 is a framework. It's not a plug-and-play solution. It's very useful if you profile it correctly, if you build the right policies, constraints, and scopes for your environment, but there's no out-of-the-box universal deployments. RFC 8693 hands you the ingredients, as it were, but it does not bake the gluten and dairy-free, still somewhat delicious cake for you. And if your project assumes that token exchange will just work for complex delegation, good luck with that. Let me know how that works for you. Okay, well, what about the next step? There's work on OAuth 2.1, and that's currently working its way through the standardization process right now. And it's a really necessary cleanup to OAuth 2.0 because it's now making proof key for code exchange mandatory for all clients. That's PXE, in case you're curious. It removes all the risky flows like implicit and resource owner password credentials, requires stricter redirect rules to close common attack vectors. The TLDR on that is it cleans up a lot of the loopholes that made it less secure than we really wanted it to be. So OAuth 2.1 will make authorization flows more secure and more consistent, which is great, but it still doesn't solve delegation. And if you thought that OAuth 2.1 would magically introduce multi-actor delegation models, I'm sorry, it's a maintenance release. It's not a redesign of how delegation works in OAuth. Okay, fantastic. Well, what's still missing? When people say we need richer delegation models, they usually mean one of a handful of things. They mean contextual constraints, things that delegate very narrowly, access this thing for this purpose during this window. It could be clear actor change. This is not about pretend you're Alice, but Bob is acting for Alice, and we know it. We know it's Bob. They mean things like lifecycle management. Delegation expires automatically when roles changes, not 6 months after the intern leaves, which is just a little bit too long and leaves you that big open window. They worry about auditability. I mean, you can see exactly who did what and when, which is not something we do very well today. And they worry about what's called transitivity control, defining whether and how a delegated authority can be further delegated to others and under what condition. So, you delegate your Costco card to your son, might want to offer limited delegation to his best friend who can actually make it to the store when he can't, something like that. There's no really good way to do that right now. I mean, and think about it, because sometimes, especially with agentic AI, you actually want the delegate, the human, the agent, or otherwise, to be able to delegate further. But you want it carefully constrained. You want it only for certain actions, only for sharing necessary information, only within tightly defined bounds. If the Costco card is being shared and is then again being shared, you probably want to limit, yes, absolutely it's okay to share this, but whoever you're sharing it to can't buy alcohol or something, can't buy cigarettes. And it's not just an age thing. Maybe it's just something you don't want to allow for. If you don't have that kind of fine-grained control, and delegation chains either just collapse into chaos or they just don't work. And right now, very few systems and very few standards handle that kind of controlled, conditional redelegation particularly well. But there are other delegation models, outside of OAuth. It's a pretty tough nut to crack, so there's things being explored like user-managed access, UMA, which lets resource owners define fine-grained sharing policies. It's a great idea. It's not particularly well adopted. Verifiable credentials and decentralized identifiers, also known as VCs and DIDs, they let an agent cryptographically prove it's authorized, which is a very promising idea, but it's still maturing, and it's definitely not consistently adopted across the digital world. Another thing that's being explored is enterprise mission profiles, which you get a customized framework for specific industries, and they're tuned for very tight compliance needs like banking or some of the infrastructure in the world. All of these do recognize that same reality, which is you can't pretend that one user, one device, and one intent matches how the world's systems work anymore. Not that they ever actually worked that way. So why am I talking about this? Because I'm not writing OAuth specs. I'm not proposing another working group to do more work. Certainly, we do not need another working group. What I'm trying to do in this podcast and in the blog post that has a whole lot more detail is I'm trying to build a bridge Because there's a growing group of implementers and architects realizing that delegation models are messy and AI agents are bumping into walls that they'd rather not have to deal with. And critical systems are relying on some really brittle workarounds. Amazing work is happening inside standards bodies like the OpenID Foundation and the IETF, and it's very thoughtful, it's very deliberate, but it's not widely understood. And because it's such a relatively small community working in those spaces, it's a relatively constrained mindset, right? The more diversity you have when you're having these conversations, the more you can actually get the edge cases, the weird cases, also the consensus you need to make this something that could be widely adopted. So if you're frustrated that surely OAuth already handles this, yes, you should be frustrated because it doesn't. And if you're worried that your AI agent has no clean path for you, that you really want to be able to delegate it to do things, you're not alone in wanting to do that because delegation isn't solved yet. But it is solvable. With better tools and more attention to what real-world delegation actually needs, I think we can build systems that reflect that messy, beautiful, multi-actor world we actually live in. And it's not going to happen overnight, and there's a whole lot of technical debt that we're going to have to overcome, but it's absolutely worth the effort. And that's it for this week's episode of the Digital Identity Digest. If it helps make things a little clearer, or at least a little more interesting, share it with a friend or colleague and connect with me on LinkedIn at HL Flanagan. And if you enjoyed the show, do be sure to subscribe and leave me a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also find the written full post at sphericalcowconsulting.com. Now stay curious, stay engaged, and let's get these conversations going.